Good morning, everybody, and welcome. If you saw me just glance at my watch, it's been that kind of week. I walked out here and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not absolutely certain I should say good morning or afternoon. I should look at my watch, so I'm sorry about that. I'm Laura Bloomberg. I'm the Dean of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and I am delighted to welcome all of you here today for this conversation with Governor Walz. Let me just take a moment. This is old news for many of you, but I always think it's an important way to situate a conversation. Let me just take a moment to situate us in this place. We're here in the Coles Auditorium in the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, an institution that Hubert Humphrey always envisioned as a living memorial to him. That would be both a school where we would prepare public policy planners, analysts, public affairs specialists. It would be an academic institution that also functioned truly as a wide open space for the community to come in and grapple with and discuss and listen to and learn from each other about the affairs of the day. All these years after his passing, we still every day try to live into that lofty vision of being both an excellent school and an excellent public forum. And there's this particular line that Hubert Humphrey used to say that I think is particularly apt when we think about this, especially when we live in contested, somewhat heated, tense times. He used to say, freedom is hammered out on the anvil of discussion, dissent, and debate. And I believe that's so true. And we're situated in this Humphrey School on the west bank of the University of Minnesota campus, nestled right up against the mighty Mississippi River. And all of this is situated on the ancestral and sacred homelands of the Dakota people. I think that matters, first, because we should acknowledge that. It also matters, I believe, for thinking about where we are and how we're rooted in place, because we can think of this. For centuries, we are sitting on land that has been the home of discussion, dissent, and debate and learning. And I think that is a powerful legacy to be a part of. And I'm proud to be a part of it today as we hear from our governor. So what we're going to have today is a conversation, not with me, but with two individuals who many of you know well. And let me introduce them and welcome them to the stage now. First of all, I would like to welcome somebody who needs no introduction to many of you, and that is Pat Kessler. Pat has been covering Minnesota politics for more than 30 years. In 2015, he was honored with a Lifetime Achievement in Broadcasting by the Midwest chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Before joining WCCO TV, Mr. Kessler was a reporter for NPR, and many of us know his voice almost more than him by his looks. And before that, he was for some time a technical assistant on a Prairie Home Companion. He's a very skilled moderator, and let's welcome to the stage Pat Kessler.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
And now for our governor. Tim Walz is the 41st governor of the state of Minnesota. He was elected in 2018. And prior to that, he served 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, serving Minnesota's 1st congressional district. In Congress, Walz served on the Agricultural Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Veterans Affairs Committee. He served on the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which is something I really look forward to talking with him about at some point. Before his election to Congress, Walz spent 24 years in the Army National Guard, and a passion that we both share. He was a teacher, very active in K-12 education, and a coach at Mankato West High School. Please welcome to the stage the 41st governor of the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz.
Whoa. Well, here we go. How is everybody today? Fantastic. Nice to see everybody coming out. Governor, to quote the great American philosophers, the Grateful Dead.
Oh, yes.
What
You
a
see my
long
shoes, huh?
There you go. What a long, strange trip it has been for you. My goodness. High school teacher, football coach, Congress, now governor. What has that been like for you, and how do you make that kind of adjustment?
Well, first of all, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to care about democracy enough to come and participate. Thank you to Dean for the work that is done here, and to Pat. And he was mentioning the Grateful Dead. We were down in Iowa during the caucuses, and somebody did this collage, one of the photojournalists, and they took the pictures of the shoes of all the people who were down there, and you matched them up. Like, this is Bernie Sanders' shoes, this is Joe Biden's shoes. And my wife I'm glad I did it, but she will not forgive me. I was wearing my 100% hemp Grateful Dead shoes, and they took the picture.
Excellent, yeah.
And matched it up. I'm pushing the hemp industry here, but yes, it is a strange journey, but it's one that I think, and it speaks more volumes to all of you, that at a time when trust in our institutions, especially democracy, is at an all-time low, it's both inspiring and terrifying that people can vote for the high school teacher down the street. I got into this well after I was 40 years old. I never once thought I would be in elected office. I certainly didn't plan my life for that. My life, I think, prepared me for it. And I think coming out of a deployment with the National Guard, being frustrated with our foreign policy, being frustrated with some of the issues that it felt like, again, everybody says this, everybody's the everyman who goes to Washington. And then I find out, oh, your father was a federal judge. Oh, this is what happened in your family. Lots of times there's that. I said, I obviously had no political background. I was a teacher, so I obviously had no money. And still the system allowed for me to be able to do that. So it's one that is both gratifying to me. It's incredibly humbling. It is mind-boggling to think that people put their trust in you to do these things. And it as I said, it's also incredibly humbling. I think the good thing is being a high school teacher, I knew when I went in that classroom that I certainly wasn't the smartest person in the room. I might have had more experience. I had a different responsibility. And I think as governor, that ability to build coalitions to solve problems is one that I'm part of that journey. So it's a humbling honor. I guess the hard part for me is knowing that I disappoint friends on a daily basis. It happens. It's part of it, but still trying to do it based on those principles that our democracy works, trying to follow science, as I was with a group of clergy yesterday on the homeless issue. We have separation of church and state, but I've often said, you certainly do not want or expect me to give you a sermon, but I do think when you're in this job, you expect me to kind of live one. And that's a place that is a challenge, but it's one that I'm
Well, you
grateful.
disappoint people on a daily basis. Is that as governor, or is that pretty much for your career as a politician or your whole life?
Yeah, well, I think that you're
I
right.
mean,
My wife would tell you
I mean,
that. I think
that's
it's as
me right
governor
here.
that it's different, because
Yeah.
I can tell you, someone asked me on this, the difference between a member of Congress and the executive branch versus the legislative branch. In Congress, all you need to be is right to yourself. You have people that I've worked with there that to be honest with you, I didn't ever see them get a single thing done, but they were right every day and they were passionately there. And there's a role for that. Advocacy has a role. And in members of Congress, what they say is the only thing a member of Congress really needs to know how to do is count to 218. And that's what it takes to get there. Governor's different, and there's expectations. And we're living in a very weird place that I think there's an expectation, because we're seeing it play out. And it depends on your point of view. I consider it quite terrifying to see an imperial presidency springing up. But I, on the other hand, will see people want me to be an imperial governor. And so that part of it is, I think, somewhat disappointing. What the power or the responsibility you have, what you're able to do, what you should do, and what you can do. And so for that, I think there's a lot of people think that things would happen right away. And I am very much an institutionalist when it comes to believing that rule of law matters and getting rule of law matters. And that part of it's somewhat challenging.
And I do want to ask about the imperial presidency, as you have coined it, and also the toxic political environment that we live in. We're going to get to that in a little while. As you see, we're passing around cards for you to write
Great.
down questions. We're going to get to those in just a little bit and talk about what's going on in this state and in this country. Let me switch a little bit, because I want to do some of the news of the day, starting with this, because the legislature is now meeting. We have already fighting over a $1 billion budget surplus. And it's funny to me, over the years, I've noticed that the legislature fights a lot more when there's extra money than they do when there's no money and we have a deficit.
Yeah.
Republicans are proposing to use the $1 billion deficit, the $1 million budget surplus to cut taxes for everybody. Will you do that?
Well, I certainly will listen to the proposals coming forward, but I think it's important to clarify where we're at. Minnesota has one of the strongest fiscal healths of any state. And the one difference is that states cannot run deficits. But last year, during the budget discussions, to reach a compromise, the only state in the union with divided legislature, all other 49 are either all Democrat or all Republican. We had a Democratic House, DFL House, Republican Senate. And in that, to reach a compromise, one of the things we did was we drew $491 million down out of our budget reserves. Now, we've been able to replenish a lot of that, but it still has $491 billion. Now, I want to be clear, first of all, the numbers are not in yet. It is a projected forecast. So what I've learned is don't forecast a forecast, especially in economics terms. But here's the deal. At the end of the month, we'll get the numbers. It'll probably be somewhere around 1.2 billion. That's about 2% of our budget. Now, to be clear on that, the people who said you overtaxed us, we actually lowered income tax last year. We were taxing our Social Security. 70% of you are not taxed on Social Security. Only the top earners get taxed on Social Security. 70% doesn't come in. Sales were up, so sales tax went up. People voluntarily bought things, and we spent a little less money than we thought we were going to in certain programs. Okay, that leaves us with 1.2. You take away the 491 to pay back what we needed to do, because we're going to have to at some point in time. If you don't do that, just to be clear, 2% inflation that we're running at is $1.2 billion. So if all of the services, University of Minnesota, snow plowing, coronavirus, actions that we're doing, if we don't do anything next year, 2% will drop off because the cost will go up. So this so-called surplus and giving it back at a time when now I should be careful about economists. It's hard to make economist jokes, but I heard a good one.
Oh boy, here we go.
Economists have correctly predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. So it's only one I know. But the point being is, longest expansion in American history, there will be a downturn, which means revenues will go down at some point, costs will go up. We're running $1 trillion deficit added to a $22 trillion debt. All of those things are going to come home. And in that environment, what we know is preparing for that rainy day that's coming makes sense. So I think it makes more sense for us to maintain the wealth that we have in this state, our roads, our bridges, our great University of Minnesota, to bond at historically low interest rates, to put the money away for a rainy day and invest in future things like children, that we know the return on the dollar is good. I think that makes more sense because this would be a one-time thing. And you saw this happen. Tax cuts, and I don't know where your philosophy is. I understand tax policy matters. If you're in a situation where it's too high or too low, those will have influences, but you have to pay for them. And deficits have skyrocketed because we did not pay for the tax cuts of 2017. We can't do that here in Minnesota. So I'm hesitant to do that. But again, I think it's incumbent upon me not to close doors before they've been fully debated. But it's a pretty heavy lift for me to see that makes sense.
Well, you say that you don't want to close the door, but your words sound like a hard no. They really do. I mean, it sounds like you're not going to go down this road.
Convince me is what I would say is. And the thing is, think of this. All these proposals were put out before we even know what the numbers is. Last year when this happened, the number dropped. $500 million. So these things have fluctuated massively on this. So I think it's a discussion. I think being honest with people, this discussion, people say Social Security, because I'll have people come up to me, my in-laws who are teachers. Wow, we shouldn't be taxing Social Security. I said, don't worry about it, Val. You're not being taxed unless you're making X amount of money. There's $19.3 billion of Social Security revenue that comes into Minnesota. We tax 5.9 of it. And what it is, there's an exemption all the way up. If you have other retirement accounts and you're making that, it starts there and goes up. So I'm just hesitant that I think it sends us out of whack. The last time we did this, we ended up running $6 billion deficits. We ended up borrowing from our schools. We ended up pushing back maintenance. It's just not good fiscal policy.
I'm going to run through a couple of things real quickly here because I really do want to hear from what everybody has to say. St. Paul teachers have voted to go on strike in 10 days because of their contract problems. The contract talks have broken down. Will you get involved? This is the second largest school district in the state, 37,000 students, all these families. Will you get involved to move this along?
Well, I'll get involved whether I like it or not. I got a 13-year-old who will be hanging out with me at work. I don't, yeah. Well, yes, at some point in time that the Bureau of Mediation Services is our smallest state agency. They're the professionals that come in when things get tough. They help settle the strike in Duluth on the snowplow drivers. But I think what you're seeing in St. Paul is something I've been talking about. We need to have a fundamental, and I went through a big setting with the revenue folks for hours the other day of looking at Minnesota tax policy from statehood all the way through and looking at that Minnesota miracle point in the late 1960s, early 1970s when property taxes were much higher and they had that convergence. I think we're at one of those points where we need to have a reset and think about this. And school finance has gotten out of whack where we're heavily dependent on local bonding referendums, and we've created the haves and have-nots amongst our schools. And that creates a situation of great angst in schools. There's a beautiful letter in the paper the other day in the Mankato Free Press. Maple River finally passed, after many tries, passed their referendum. Now, these things pass with 90% out in the public, which says Minnesotans believe in education. They believe there's a need. But this woman wrote a letter and said, you know, I voted no. It passed by 10 votes out there. She said, I voted no, but I love our schools. I want to invest. She said, I just don't think fiscally we can manage this. And that issue of communities being farmland rich and property tax poor has created situations depending on where you go to school. State share of that funding has gone down. I think it makes sense for us to see an ability to have a little more equalization in that. And what that does for those of you out here who are worried about taxes, lots of people come to St. Paul and say, I didn't raise taxes. And then it goes back home and local officials have to make the hard decisions, like in Duluth, to raise sales tax so that they could build the roads because we didn't pass anything on transportation. Same thing happens with schools. So property taxes, while historically pretty low amongst other states here, are now rising because state share is shrinking. So here's what I would say. We'll get involved with this and already talking about re-looking at how we do school finance. If needed, the Bureau of Mediation Services will try and get involved. But this is not unique to St. Paul. And let's just be clear, one of the things that the teachers are asking for, and when I travel in schools and being a 20-year classroom teacher, is the lack of support staff, especially focused around mental health issues. And teaching today is a lot different than it was even 12 years ago when I'm doing it. And that's where they're focused. And that's another thing the state needs to help with.
These are great. I'm going to get to these in just a moment. I want to talk about the toxic political atmosphere that is out there right now. We're all witnessing it.
We have a real problem with police violence and police murders in our state, Governor Walz.
How about
You've
if,
been governor for 1 year. We've been waiting that entire year for action. There have been
how about if I ask that question?
Can I take that question?
How about if I ask that
Can
question?
I take the question?
How about if he answers it? How
Sure.
about if he answers it? How we is this the justice for Jamar? Well, can you wait for 1 second here? Hold on. Is that a question? Is that a question? Ma'am, is that a question? Let's ask the question. Are you going to let him answer the question? Are you going to let him answer? I am talking to you. Will you allow him to answer the question?
I'm glad to answer the question.
Let him answer the question.
Please
let him answer the question.
Can I formulate what you're...
I am the moderator here. You have a lot of wisdom.
I'm glad to answer.
A lot of wisdom. Let him answer.
Been interrupting the governor. He's trying to answer the question.
You're interrupting.
Thank you.
Now sit down so everybody can listen and see. Yeah.
So the issue of... I think we
got
started...
an okay boomer
Ma'am,
here. Wow.
We started this...
Will you let him answer the question? Will you let him answer the question?
The dean started... The dean...
Will you let him answer the question? Okay, I'm going to ask you again. Will you allow this to go forward? Will you allow this forum to go forward? Let him. You asked a question. Second, this is the second time. Will you allow the governor to answer the question? I didn't ask you to sit down. Will you allow the governor to answer the question?
First
Here
of
we
all,
go.
and I'm deeply sorry for your loss and your brother's loss. And this issue of policing in our communities and distrust that runs through our communities.
What? Let him answer the question, please. Let him answer the question. All right, Governor, you want to try one more time? That's the second time.
This
Go
space
ahead.
that we're in, this is the healthy space that we need to be. And I can tell you that...
Will you let him answer? Will you let him answer the question? Go ahead.
How do these conversations, I'm going to give...
What? Okay, now, are you going to? This is the third time. We've asked you 3 times. Allow him to answer the question.
I want to give...
It's not a yes or no. This is not. Please
I
answer
am not
the question,
the Attorney
Governor.
General, but let me speak to the Attorney. Let me.
All right,
let me,
guys.
Ma'am,
Will you allow him to answer?
I am the governor. I am doing the job. So give me the opportunity. Please give me the opportunity to express as I have understood and learned what my powers and what I am able to do. This is a state, just so you know, I do not have the power to grant pardons in this state. It's one of the few states. No, ma'am, what I'm trying to...
We're not to... Are you going to allow him to answer the question?
I don't know how to answer the question.
All right, so we can't... You know, we can't answer the question.
I did not say that. Ma'am.
Governor, why don't you wait
We
for
have
1 second.
started a process...
All right. This is we're debating. Let him answer the question. Who wants? All right, we're going to move on here. If you don't allow him to answer the question,
I would really like to, because
you've disrupted this.
The pain
allow
that you
him
are feeling
to answer.
is real. What's happening in our communities is...
Go ahead.
Why is my humanity diminished on this? Why do I not believe... Why do I not try to say what I am trying to do? Attorney...
All right, this is the last time I'm going to... This is the last time I'm going to ask you to allow him to answer the question.
The Attorney General, along with the Department of Public Safety, John Harrington, have convened conversations across the state to try and gather information.
All right. Will you maybe, hey guys, maybe other people here would like to hear his answer, to hear what's going on. So maybe others want to hear this. All right. All right. All right. Now it's disrupted. I'm going to ask you to leave now. Governor, just wait. Just wait for 1 second. Now that you have disrupted this, we're going to ask you to leave. We're going to ask you to leave. Does anybody else want to hear the governor this morning? Let me hear from you. Let me hear from you. All right. We are now going to ask you to leave. If you don't leave and allow this to go forward, we're going to have you escorted out. All right? The governor wants to answer this question. So, you haven't allowed him to.
Would you like to meet with me as soon as we finish this so that I can answer the others? Would you like to take a minute?
Well, is that the answer? You would. The answer is yes. You would like to meet with him afterwards. All right, that's all. That's all. Then we're not going to continue this with you here. So let us. We've asked you to stop 3 times. Now we're going to ask you to be escorted out.
A chance to answer, ma'am.
We're all going to take a 5-minute break.
Valerie
Governor
has been in my home on numerous occasions.
Governor, let's wait for a second.
No.
Hey, everybody, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, here we go. Sorry.
No, ma'am.
We're ready.
All right.
So let's go in the back.
Yeah.
I'll stay here. I'm going to stay here.
All right. I'm glad to stay too. I mean, so I'm fine. I'm good. I'm glad to. Yeah. And I meet on numerous occasions, and they didn't give us a chance. This forum that Attorney General Ellison.
Okay, we're just going to take a break while we're doing this. Now, the governor has offered to meet with these folks after this event. So we're going to do that, but I don't think that that's the purpose of what this disruption is. So we're going to wait. All right. All right, here we go. What's that? Yes. All right, we've asked 3 times for you. Are you going to allow this forum to continue? Yes. All right, it's time for you to leave. We're going to ask people to escort you out. Will you be here? Will you be here afterwards to talk to the governor? No, will you be here to talk to the governor after this event? Are you going to be here after the event to talk to the governor? Well, I'm asking you if you will meet with the governor after this event. Is that a yes? Is that a yes? All right, it's time. Yeah. So we're going to ask you to leave and escort you out. We've tried to give you the opportunity. Well, in my view, these folks have a lot of wisdom if they would share it. So, all right, let's go that way. Well, we do want to hear. So I apologize. This will just take a couple of minutes, and then we'll be back. Well, very dramatic. I did want this to be memorable, and it will be for everybody. So the governor's offer still stands that he will meet with these protesters should they choose after this event. So I personally believe that protests like this, not only do I welcome them in general, they have a lot of wisdom that the rest of us do not have. And so if we could all talk about it, that would be fantastic. I'd like to welcome back to the stage, if the governor's here, Governor Tim Walz. All right. Let's give this a shot again. I would like you to answer that question, however, because this is one of the most important issues that Minnesota faces today.
This passion and this anguish is real. This is happening across the country. It tears at our communities. It tears in a forum like this because we have to figure out what is going wrong. Why are these situations continuing to rise? So one of the first things we did, Attorney General Ellison, and I want to give him credit, is leading on this, along with Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington. And they starting to do best practices. They're bringing folks involved, and they're having the community discussions. And those of you who have been to them, they are passionate and raw, just like this. Having your brother killed on the streets is something that I think you've earned the right to be upset. You've earned the right to be angry. But for us to try and figure out, how do we change the model of policing? How do we make sure that the communities feel like, as it is, part of the community? We're doing things in our budget, put money into grants to go to those communities. The recommendations that are going to come out in the police-involved shootings that will come back to us will inform the decisions that we make. And it is being done with people impacted this. It is being done. And I refused in this case, I'm just going to say it, to dismiss Valerie Castile's pain in saying that. She has been an advocate and gone out of her way to make sure in every single experience. She told me that she was getting tired of standing in front of the governor's residence. She wanted to be inside once in a while and hear about that. This is a woman who, in the grief and the deep pain she has, is figuring out how to turn her advocacy into policies that make sure that no other mother goes through what she did with Philandro. So I want to acknowledge, and I think all of us in this room, this is coming out of deep pain. It's coming out of something that's going wrong in our communities. It is something that does have to be addressed. And I think for us to try and move, and I say this ability, this is where you're in this situation. As governor, I wish with all my heart that I could stop these immediately. And I'm trying to figure that out. But the ability to what you're asked to do. I am not the top prosecutor in the state. You do not possess that capacity. And to try and build the system that people believe justice is really there. Not one person who sits in this. I am very adverse to executive action, even when I have that. But the point I pointed out about the pardon system is one of the things that I am trying to change. It's one of the reasons that we took action on capping probationary periods. We have to have massive criminal justice reform. And that is a piece of this. That does not ease the pain of losing a brother. It does not ease the pain of what's happening there, but it does get systemically. Why is it that Black males in Minneapolis are more apt to be arrested than to graduate from the University of Minnesota? Why is it that these disparities exist? Why is it that arrest rates, all of those things? We have to know. So I appreciate all of you. And I would ask that the spirit of this, it's only to be able to get to others, because I know there's folks in here. I will be disappointed if somebody's not going to talk about copper nickel mining, about Line 3, about other things. These things matter, and they are deeply controversial, and it doesn't diminish that it's one over the other. We have got to be able to deal with climate change, to policing in our communities, to budgets.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about Line 3 in one moment.
Yes.
And let's see those. Let's take a look at those. So I think this is very interesting too. Can I ask one more question about Black Lives Matter, guys? Sure. Can I ask one more question about Black Lives Matter? Hello.
Sure.
Hello. Hello. One of the most valuable parts of Black Lives Matter to me has been to expose to this state institutional racism. And we're not just talking about, of course, we are talking about arrests and the disproportionate amount of jail and all that, but it's mortgages, it's housing, it's neighborhoods.
Yes.
It's all of that.
Yes.
It's all of that. So that's what we have to deal with, isn't it?
Yeah. And this idea of equity and inclusion across state government and some of the first actions that we took, you think about it,
if you want to stand.
Things that weren't taken, things that were not taken into consideration. You think about a decision that you may not think about an equity issue and the long-term historical trauma that was caused by it, both emotional and economic. When the Department of Transportation decided to build Highway 94 and cut Rondo in half, no decision with the community was taken into consideration. That has caused historic inequities in wealth development amongst communities of color living in Rondo. And it was done, again, I think the argument could be made whether it was done out of malice or it was done out of ignorance. It makes no difference to the communities impacted by it. What we're saying in Minnesota is that all of those decisions have to be focused through the lens of equity and inclusion. And I just saw it today. There was a great op-ed by Patricia Torres-Ray talking about the issue that we'll talk about next is environmental justice as it impacts communities of color or indigenous communities disproportionately to other communities. As we strive to take care of and look at carbon sequestration, we look at carbon reductions. The senator's point is the place where we were having the backlash of that was falling in the Phillips neighborhood, which wouldn't be accepted anywhere else. So, so this issue of deep-seated inequities in our system, from transportation to schools to energy policy, is real, and it's one of the things that I've said. I have young children. The idea of prohibition around cannabis reform, one of the big pieces of that is, first of all, prohibition doesn't work. But secondly, the racial inequities that have been caused by criminalization on cannabis have caused immense problems generationally.
And I want to get to that also, but let us get to Line 3. That's the first question I want to ask from the audience today. And this is a question very straightforward. Governor, why are you choosing to willingly create a public health crisis and put Native communities at risk by failing to oppose Line 3?
Yeah, and this is the issue, this issue around. Now, I would go back to that question. I've said all along as we deal with this, and I want to just be clear to put this in context, and I will get exactly to the direct question, but to be in context. I talked about this in Congress. I ran in one of the most Republican districts, and I voted for cap and trade. I'm a geography teacher. Existential threat of climate change is, again, don't just admire the problem, pat yourself on the back. That is not debatable anymore. And it's why in the state of Minnesota, we've moved on the most aggressive clean car standards. We've moved to decarbonization of our system by 2050. It's why we've put everything into that of an understanding that it has to be there. This issue of Line 3, a physical pipeline, and just to be clear, I said on PHMSA, the Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, when I was in Congress, there's 2.3 million miles of pipeline in this country, crisscrossing the country. The issue of Line 3, an aging pipeline, that the decision was made, and this is where this becomes really important on the rule of law. Minnesota's standards, Minnesota's laws on environmental protection, the Public Utilities Commission goes through, and they are the ones that authorize, along with state agencies, the DNR, the MPCA, of issuing permits for these projects. That process has to be honored. If they get it wrong, the courts are the adjudicators of it to go back and challenge that. What we are saying right now is work through this process. I and my administration has not issued any of the permits. What we did was we questioned and appealed the certificate of need. Now, just to be clear, I think that's going to be a hard one because the way that the law is written, the certificate of need deals with power generation, not power movement. So when a court looks at it through a narrow lens, they may determine that the new Line 3 replacement pipeline meets the requirement for certificate of need. Now, what many of the activists would be saying,
well, hold on. Let him finish.
I'm hearing.
I'm going to ask you a question.
I'm hearing you. That's the process we're in. Please allow me.
Governor, let's wait for one second.
Can I at least go through the process? No. Yes, I'll answer your question. When all of the information comes in, when the courts make their determination, and when the agency themselves, which are the overage, they will make a determination.
All right, so Governor, hold on for 1 second. What I'm going to do is break the
answer
rules
is
here.
Follow the science, follow the rules, and follow the law. When that
okay. All right, so we're not going to debate, but I am going to allow. I'm breaking the rules here, Governor. Hold on 1 second. Does that satisfy you?
No, you've done nothing to stop it.
Well,
what would you like me to do?
What have you done to actually think about the science? What are you actually
now
doing?
I just told you on carbon reduction, on the usage, the front end, all of the things we've done. That is
all right. So we're gonna ask. Let him finish the. Can he answer the question? But yes, I understand. Would you like him to answer the question? All right. I know. All right.
She asked me, what are you doing? I am making the case on the reduction of need by actual movement. There is no debate that the reduction of carbon through clean cars and the proposal, and that is being done through rulemaking, which is going to be real. It is not a pipe dream.
All right.
Please,
so
it's not a,
I'm going to let
it
him
is going to
answer
happen.
this.
So please connect A to B. If you're reducing the need, you're reducing the need for the carbon that's in the system.
All right, Governor, that's
so she asked me what I can do. Here's what I'm going to ask you. As governor, what you will you answer my question on this? Do you want me to stop the pipeline tomorrow? Yeah. Okay. Under what authority? And I just said that. I do not have that authority. Now I'm asking you this.
All right. Now, Governor,
please, this is an important question, Pat.
Yes.
This is an important question. Listen to what you just said.
Answer. All right. Now,
yes, I
can
do
you let
have
him
the
answer,
power to
and then
make
I'm
the
gonna
system
move
work.
on to other
Let me
issues.
give one more question. You're asking me, think about what you just asked me to do. Sidestep the statutory laws that were written, the statutory requirements, and the entities that are there to perform those, and the court's independent review of whether they should happen. Here's what you should fear. What about a governor who decides they want to build a pipeline and they don't care about any of the process? You're telling me that.
All right, no, we're not debating.
I
that.
can't debate.
All right, so that's fine. All right, now we're gonna move on.
If you
to
want an
other
imperial
questions. Can you
governor,
help me with
get
this?
one. If you
Can you
want
help me with
rule of
this? We're gonna
law,
move on to
follow
other
it.
questions for the other people in
I
the audience.
know climate change is real. I am doing
Well,
everything
all
in my
considered.
power to reduce the carbon, and I'm
All right, Governor,
I
we're
don't-
going
I
to
don't-
move on to the next question. So guys, I want to move on to the other questions. We have a lot of other people here who have other questions. So I appreciate what you've done. I allowed you to ask questions. Now we're going to move on. All right? All right, guys? All right? Will you help me with this?
I don't know what authority I have.
Stop line free! 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 Stop line free!
Okay.
Stop line free! 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 Stop line free!
All right.
Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free!
All right, we're going to let this go for a minute,
Stop line free!
and then we're going to move on. All right?
Stop line free! 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 Stop line free!
All right, we're gonna give this 1 minute, and then we're gonna end. So, all right,
Stop line free! Stop
all right, it's time to move, escort people out.
free! Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free!
All right, we're all gonna. Do you want this to continue? Would you like this forum to continue? Let me know. All right. Then I'm going to ask the people at the U to ask you to leave. All right. All right, here we go. We're going to move people out. And I hate to do this. I'm a reporter. I don't like doing this. I think in general, you guys have been very respectful, but now I'm going to ask you to leave.
Stop line free! 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 Stop line free!
Would you guys,
Stop line free! 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 Stop line free!
Or to make sure we got nobody at their
We'll come with it. Stop line free! 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 Stop line free!
guys, he's going to meet with
Stop line free!
you. Ready?
Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free!
Governor's going to meet with you.
Stop line free! Stop line free!
All right. So what we're going to do here is move these folks around. You're welcome. If you'd like to participate, the governor's going to meet and talk with some of these folks, and we're going to move it along.
Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free! Stop line free!
We're going to escort them out.
Thank you all.
Stop line free!
Very dramatic morning. I will call it memorable. As a reporter, it's very difficult.
Pat, if I could, I would also note there are pieces of legislation moving through the legislature this year that would curtail people's ability to protest. I will oppose those with every fiber of my being as they go through, just to be clear that this is it's healthy, but that reconciliation, and we have to agree on some facts as they're established. And this idea of
Let him finish. Let's let him finish again. Go ahead.
the established capacity in a democracy, and we're in really challenging times, because the interesting part is I bring back up that imperial presidency thing of how do we establish the system? How do we get that right? It very well could be, and the courts have determined, then they may come back to that conclusion, that the process that we have in place through the agencies, through the Public Utilities Commission, is not adequate to do what we need to do. And then the proper way to do that is to change this. But this is very dangerous thinking, to say that I can arbitrarily go outside what is not the power by the constitutional power, the legal power of the governor, to be able to do it. That's dangerous.
I'm going to ask another question from the audience, but I do want to get back to what we see as a toxic atmosphere now in discussions in politics in Minnesota. But first, I'm going to read this question from the audience, and then I want to get to that. Republicans and Democrats have been debating how to handle perceived light rail safety issues. How can we address these concerns without disproportionately naming low-income folks, people of color, homeless people? This is part of the Republican proposals to get tough on crime on light rail, but they want to tie it to local government aid. They say crime is terrible in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Well, first of all, this is a very good. It's a very good.
Well, we've asked the question. What? All right. All right. We've let the governor answer the question. Would you please escort? Thank you. So this is about light rail safety and crime in the Twin Cities. And cities that have sports and entertainment venues, if those of you who haven't heard it, the proposal is if they don't add more police, they would forfeit some local government aid.
Yeah, well, I don't agree with that policy, but I want to be clear about this. The question you got answered. Safety in light rail and safety in public places is a top concern. Actually, for a governor, that has to be a top concern of mine. And the intersection of poverty, the intersection of policing actions with this happening. And for many of you know, one of my top priorities is homelessness and the ability of home stability. And I went down and rode the trains, and just as it would happen, the people I were talking to were involved in a fatal incident just an hour after I was on the trains riding, as we're counting folks who are unsheltered homeless. But I want to be very clear about this. In so many cases, the folks who are unsheltered homeless are the victims of crime that are happening on there. They're being preyed upon. But we have folks who want to ride, who are compassionate. And how do we make sure? And this was my thing. You can't simply say we're going to push everybody off the train and not have a place for them to go. That's why the unsheltered homelessness was immediately meant to add 500 beds in a way. And the business community stepped up, both from a sense of I think, basic human decency and from an economic standpoint on this. So I want to be clear, this issue of doing this, and it's very dangerous, I think, the idea of when you have rural legislators telling people they can't feel safe to come into the city, or trying to set this situation up of us against another, and then tying it to local government aid. They said it the other day that the pot of money that builds bike lanes is not the same pot of money that does police. And when asked about that, the minority leader in the House said, yeah, but it makes a good soundbite. Point blank. The Mankato Free Press wrote about this today, about how this is not the way to go about it. So I want to acknowledge this. Crime and the reduction of crime is a top priority and has to be dealt with. The whole spectrum of tools that we have to reduce crime need to be employed on this. We need to do it in a manner that does take into consider racial differences that come up. But this issue of moving people off of light rail, of making sure light rail is safe, Met Council can do that. But the broader issue, and you're seeing this across the country, I was mentioning to someone, Governor Newsom of California just gave his State of the State address. He gave it on one topic, homelessness, because it is root and foundational to all of the other things that are happening. Here in Minnesota, we're on the front end of this. So I welcome the conversation. I think we can talk about public safety and public transit safety, but being very cognizant of communities who feel like we're certainly not going to get in a place where people are profiling who's on the train, people are doing this. That is a conversation that we're seeing happening in the presidential primary debate. But we in Minnesota have to look at the facts. Crime rates have ticked up. Now, the thing that's really frustrating to people over time, historic crime rates are relatively low. That does not help a family who is a victim of a random crime that happens. That's real. So in answer to the question, you will see a proposal come out of us in a supplemental budget that will work across the whole spectrum. It will work both with policing, with communities, with the homeless issue, with the issues of untreated mental illness, which we see a lot of times. And I'm telling you, as I go out and I do these counts, there are a lot of paths to homelessness. And in the heart of this, in a lot of cases, is some of these of just the little bit of support that can get there, the little bit of the mental health piece, and we can start to avoid that. But I do think it's important to keep in mind the folks suffering from mental health issues and homelessness are so disproportionately the victims of crime. And that's what we need to keep in mind as we address it.
I have another question from the audience that I'd like to ask. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately, because of the disruptions. But I want to ask, this is newsworthy, also something from the audience. What can you do, what will you do about this terrible fire in Becker, which is polluting the air and affecting cities all around it? What can you do about that? What will you do?
And I've been briefed twice over the last 48 hours with State Fire Marshal, Department of Health, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The fire at Becker with Northern Metals, and just to be clear, this is an entity that I went to court with over violations of what they were doing. It's an entity that we moved out of North Minneapolis. Think about this. That fire could have been in North Minneapolis. I don't say it's any better because if you're up there right across the road where the housing initiatives, school was called off in that because of this. What they they did not follow the procedures that needed to be in place. And again, I go back to the law. Minnesota Pollution Control Agency issued the permit for them to operate their facility and the Clean Air Act. The county is responsible for the storage of vehicles. They stack these things 90 foot high and 100 yards long with no fire breaks between them, as they're supposed to have. So when this pile of cars, interiors, plastics, carcinogens, whatever else, when it caught on fire, they had to then break it, create fire lines. We were pouring on 1 million gallons of water an hour up there. It all went somewhere. There was a brief holding pond there to try and to capture it. The fire is under control now. MPCA, because Northern Metals, the way our laws is written, they were the monitors of this. And I just said it, and I have to be very careful as governor because they will sue me, but I do not trust this entity to do the right thing. This is where there's that fine line. And trust me, my Republican friends in the legislature are always talking to me about overregulation until a fire happens. And then they said, Governor, why weren't you regulating more on that? And that is the truth. And it is that line between public safety and the ability of them to be able to make a profit. I think as we followed through this, I asked in an after action report, what potentially needs to be changed? What about the permitting of the stored vehicles before the grinder went to work? How is that interface? Follow up, MPCA's monitors will have results back in about 48 to 72 hours. It appears at that time, I think the way they tell me these, they are not healthy, but they're not dangerous, which is not comforting at all when I heard that, meaning that folks who are in the general facility aren't going to get instantly sick, but we need to know, much like a 9/11 situation, what did you breathe in with hundreds of cars burning? So
will the state allow this company to reopen?
Well, that's a question that we're going to put a 30-day hold on it. Believe it or not, their permit
What do you mean 30-day hold?
Their permit was scheduled. They were going to start operations tomorrow. That this has been on hold since it was one. It was just and I don't know whether this is chance or the two are interconnected. We have to find that. My guidance, again, in the ability that we do have the ability to hold the permit for 30 days, according to law. And I think that the MPCA commissioner, along with the Minnesota Department of Health, will make that decision.
Are you looking at ways to hold this company accountable? for
Yes.
all of the damage to the state.
Yes, we saw this with Water Gremlin, with the situation of people taking lead home on that. And again, one of these situations, this is that fine line that we have these things in place. The government as a regulator in working with businesses to ensure worker safety, ensure children's safety, and ensure public safety. And when we have these just totally simplified, sophomoric arguments about we've cut regulations and business is booming. Maybe, but maybe so is carcinogens in the water. So are pollution or worker safety issues. So we're looking at this. We did something that we beefed up our Department of Labor and Industry to be able to have more inspectors on place and then follow the rules as it went to court to bring them back in. So I can tell you this, the answer is yes, of making sure that folks are following this. The good news is most of our employers are ethical and follow the rules, but we need to have it in place. And I know I get it from the business community all the time. You always put regulations in place for the 1%. Yeah, that's kind of how things work in society. If it were our better angels, we wouldn't need it, but we do.
Now, we only have a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you about the election coming up March 3rd, Minnesota primary. Minnesota voters are going to be handed 2 ballots, one Republican or one Democratic. And there will be a record of which ones they chose. What are you going to do about that? Do you see that there is some concern about that?
Again, the governor alone cannot change this policy. Me, and as I see this, I am uncomfortable with this. I am uncomfortable with putting people out there. The secret ballot is absolutely sacred. I'm super uncomfortable when I have judges calling me and telling me, Governor, I'm not going to be able to vote. You don't want, there's judges, clergy, others who want to stay. And it's hard to believe in today's world that people do stay neutral in that, but it does. I am more concerned about, once again, the state of Minnesota is going to be an outlier. There is federal monies for the Help America Votes Act. We were one of the states targeted by Russian interference. This is not debatable. And your politics aside, and I'm not saying how it changed the election or not, but the foreign interference or the potential in our elections is real. And all kinds of outside experts asked us to solidify that. We had to fight for months last year to get the federal money that's ours. 43 states don't require the legislature to even vote on this. So I've got a senator that is going to hold up election security money because they want us to get rid of same-day voting. And the two are totally disconnected. And it's coming back again that they want to reinstitute voter ID. And so they will let us get the money to protect our voting system if we will give them voter ID or take away same-day voting. This to me is deeply troubling. I think the Secretary of State and the parties need to make a decision around this. If it were up to me, your information would stay private. It doesn't need to be out there. You choose the party you want to vote for in that primary and go. I think all of these things we do that suppress voter turnout, that suppresses participation, goes against the democracy. This stuff is not supposed to be made easy. I was at a town hall once when I was a congressman and somebody said, the problem is there's way too many of you guys. And I did not say this, but I wanted to. How many? How many members of Congress? 435, just so we know. He said, yeah, that's right. There's too many of you. I said, well, what do you think? We should have like 200. I said, man, why think so small? Get rid of them all and name one person king and they can make the decision. That's the problem with this. That is the problem and the beauty of this, that it is a real challenge. But if we do not protect those rule of laws and the separation of powers amongst the institutions, I am deeply concerned. Because the easy way is to make an executive order.
President Trump says that this Russian interference is a hoax. You say it's not.
This does not go on the opinion page. This is factually incorrect that it's a hoax. It is factually true that it is. And
the president tried.
It's not a me versus them.
The president did not participate in the investigation in the House that impeached him. Do you believe the Senate should have voted to convict and remove President Trump from office?
I not being there, and I would say this that went through. I think
come on, Governor.
The evidence was overwhelming. I am deeply concerned about this. I am deeply concerned for our democracy. I don't make that a secret. I think that it is creating a situation where we can't have these very healthy debates about real things. This debate today was about police shooting and systemic racism. It was about environmental degradation and how do we switch to a clean energy economy while protecting what we have right now. It's a discussion on our elections and our democracies. These are important issues. And I mean, it boggles my mind that the sacred and the sanctity of our elections, to have someone from the outside would be able to interfere with that is really troubling. So I'll just say this. I disagree with where the Senate went. So
You're supporting Amy Klobuchar for president. Will you support the Democratic nominee, whoever it is?
I will.
If it's Bernie Sanders, who is a Democratic socialist, will you support him? And can he defeat President Trump?
Yes and yes, he can. He can do on both of those things. And I think this is a healthy discussion. I am proud of the Democratic Party that there is a wide variety. I do think one thing that I've been talking about, maybe post-governor, whenever 3 years or whenever people decide that is, there is a longitudinal spectrum on progressive to conservative, but I would argue there's a vertical spectrum that goes into that true effectiveness, the ability to build coalitions and actual results that does not get captured into that. I'm glad the Democratic Party is having that discussion. I would be terrified. It would be simple. Trust me, I watched that debate the other night. I'm banging my head on the wall. But I would be terrified if we had unanimity, total support of one candidate right now before this got out there. This is messy and it's ugly, and Churchill was right. This is the worst form of government except for every other one. And so I'll stand by it.
Well, maybe that's a good way to end this. I really wish we didn't have to end this so soon. And I apologize that we weren't able to get to a lot of these questions. But I'd like to thank the Humphrey School for doing this. Thank you so much. And thank you, Governor Walz, for spending all this time with us. Thank you all. Thank you all for being so patient and helping us out here. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. You did a great job. I'm sorry about that.